All right. Hi everyone. Okay, my name is Medina. I'm from Lagos, Nigeria, and I'm with the organizing team for ICT 2024. And for today's topic, aesthetics and embodied experiences, we'll be having Dr. Samantha Goss. So Dr. Samantha is an assistant professor of arts and arts education at the University of Northern Iowa, and she'll be sharing her perspective on aesthetics and embodied experience. So I'll be handing the floor over to Dr. Samantha to share perspective. So meanwhile, you can drop in the chat box where you're joining from, maybe your name or where you're joining from, so we can know who we are interfacing with or the people that we're interfacing with. Thank you for the session. Dr. Samantha, over to you.
Okay. Let me share my screen again. Share. Okay, so again, my name is Samantha Goss, and I am here to speak about aesthetics and embodied experiences. Please bear with me as I'm trying to stick to my notes because it is the middle of the night here. I'm not a night person and I'm battling a cold. Um, but the transformative power of education can be seen in aesthetics and embodied experiences, which engage all ways of processing information and knowing. I believe in the transformative power of education, but have approached the same goal usually from a conceptual framework of aesthetics, engrossment, and holistic education. So, in this presentation, I plan to share some working definitions of those concepts and connect them to some learning experiences that I believe demonstrate that connection to transformative education and the power of experiences to help transform students. I ask you to reflect on what I've included as art and aesthetic education in this presentation. Sometimes it is not exactly what we expect, and the overall importance of experience that engages the body and mind. So, in preparing for this presentation, I spent a little time looking at research that prioritized the term transformative education. And I apologize if I don't use that term as often because it is the topic of the conference. But my interest in aesthetics and embodied experiences has all been done more recently under the umbrella of holistic education. But I find it interesting and relevant that like all of these topics that I have worked in are really interested in transformation. And so on the left is our agenda, beginning with the terms that I plan to kind of move through and situate as a conceptual framework in order to be a foundation for examples towards the end. And so a big part of this is aesthetics, right? And aesthetics is more than the visual arts or someone's style or taste. Aesthetics often is of interest to art education, and it can be broadly defined as the study of everything that goes into the human capacity to make an experience meaning. Aesthetics in art education are often limited to thinking about making or focus on the ability to use tools and skills to create visual works of art. But the reality is that both aesthetics and art education are really about inquiry and using tools and skills to investigate or communicate learning. Richard Sigismund, my mentor, wrote that happiness is an aesthetic problem of self and worth. For how is one to choose between happiness that one finds personally authentic or what is sold as happiness, often wealth? So, if art is a process of taking things apart so that we might think about rebuilding in new ways, then the art classroom is a place to critically examine what we are told happiness looks like and determine our own version of happiness at that moment. Now, dealing with this personal reflection of the concept of happiness um, being an aesthetic problem that can be handled in the art room, before even thinking about where making visual art plays a role sometimes is far beyond people's expectations of what would fit into those definitions. But the thinking is most important, and the evidence of the thinking, it can be presented in a visual work of art or just through the process of making and reflecting on it. That is really important in aesthetic and art education. So, aesthetics specifically, there are many definitions and beliefs and approaches, but generally there are three strands of focus when studying aesthetics. There is the concept, the experience, and the object. So I selected an image of nature reclaiming a man-made structure for this slide to consider those different strands of aesthetics and how picking a different strand means thinking about this image in different ways. So if we think of aesthetics as a concept, we would be discussing what is beauty related to this scene that is captured in this image. Is this a beautiful scene or not? If we approach aesthetics as an object, we would discuss the artistry and impact of the photograph itself. But in my own work, and because of my role preparing future educators, I'm interested in the experience strand. And so imagine you are exploring this place and you stumble upon this scene specifically, and it causes you to pause and take it in. And maybe so much so that you want to document it through a photograph. That is um, kind of the mindset to think about aesthetics as experience. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So aesthetics, like art education, is primarily concerned with inquiry, and both embrace a highly contextual knowing. They welcome the nuance. Aesthetics related to the arts and more offers a space to embrace more holistic thinking, which involves contextual, intuitive, creative, and physical ways of knowing. And so again, thinking about aesthetics broadly, it could be thought of as everything that informs our capacity as humans, allowing us to create and experience meaning. And so you can see where that create and experience meaning tends to work really well in the arts. The physical and cognitive act of perception constructs meaning as new knowledge merges with past experiences, pushing our understandings beyond bare recognition. So the complexity of your experience, stumbling upon or engaging with this scene, is a more aesthetic or holistic way of creating meaning. However, I feel the desire to pause, take it in, and then possibly document it acknowledges an aesthetic quality that does not necessarily exist in every walk you take. Could it be the scene that pushes um, this from an everyday experience to an aesthetic experience? Could it be the moment in your life that you happen to be in when you stumble upon this? I'm not totally sure, but I know that creating the possibility of an aesthetic experience is really important for students. So another term is engrossment, and this is the one that is really a core to my work. Um, I try to bring it into all of my research. The term comes from Nell Noddings, who is well known for care. She proposed that there's three components to kind of create or a catalyst for care. One is commitment. So the specific level of being in relation that allows for the next two components. So the second, engrossment, is this like deep paying attention and like really to what the person truly says. Um, more of an empathy. And this allows for the third component, which is motivational displacement. And so a person who cares can make caring choices and take action that benefits the other person, not themselves, because of this engrossment. They're informed by this engrossment. And I find that really powerful and fascinating where it shows up in our relationships, our learning, etc. But care is complicated. It brings interesting assumptions when you use that word. People often think of mothers and, I don't know, more of this familial care, and they get further away from the inquiry part that I'm interested in. So engrossment, if you're viewing it through aesthetic philosophies, names like this specific level of, and depth of engagement and the learning and possibility of informed action that follows is really interesting. And I'm working with this definition at the moment, that engrossment is this very complex, relational, highly contextual aesthetic experience that is both cognitive and affective, perception and discernment, what we do with it. And so this is close to the idea of noticing deeply that is associated with Maxine Green's research often. Um, and that describes, the sincere relational cognitive engagement rather than a personal attribute. And that means that someone's not just born with better skills, or to be engrossed and notice things and observe. It means that we can teach this skill, we can support, encourage this skill. And it's really important because a student could be engrossed in themselves, others, ideas, or contexts. And so this means that education should acquaint the learner with the realm of their own inner world, and the arts does this really well. Um, it is a time for honest dialogue and quiet reflection, um, because without a knowledge of our inner self, all outward knowledge can be shallow and without purpose. And um, that makes me think of metacognition and being like aware of what we're doing, the choices we're making, how they impact thing. And the arts work really well for teaching students that, and really um, having them see the cause and effect. So experience and embodiment, I've put those words together because I want to focus on experiences. They welcome the body to learning, right? And specifically in the US context, the contemporary demands of education have often impeded educators' abilities to curate education experiences that foster embodied knowing and engrossment. The number of minutes spent on subjects is often dictated to teachers, meaning they must make difficult decisions about whether to break a policy or cut off a really important learning experience. And learning is often confined to a classroom, so limiting our connection to the world around us. And we have to remember that humans create meaning through their bodies and their minds, and that the body should not be considered to a lesser extent. And contemporary education is prioritizing the mind, and they're often separating the mind and body. I believe engrossment assists with knowledge derived from our minds and bodies, moving from our subconscious to our conscious, that metacognition that I talked about. But without the inclusion of the body, engrossment doesn't have the full picture of all the information available from within and outside ourselves. We have to access our senses and have this bodily awareness. So we cannot undervalue that awareness. Is very necessary for being present and actively engaged in the interconnectedness of life that leads to transformative learning experiences. So embodiment is really important to prioritize for benefiting the learner because it's allowing the mind and body to connect. Static experiences engage felt senses, and so they can spark a thought or a physical reaction. And this knowledge, like the inquiry in aesthetics, is a really iterative process between all aspects of ourselves and the world. And so it comes together in this like unified sensorial knowing that's valued in theorizing education, but it doesn't always take hold in practice. And that is a problem for learning experiences. So all of this information kind of culminates around this goal of aesthetic experiences, which are unique moments when it's possible to know the details and the whole individually and united as new knowledge and meaning emerges. So there's a difference between just experiences and an aesthetic experience, right? And educators will carefully plan and facilitate many experiences for students without the guarantee that it will rise to the level of an aesthetic experience. which makes experience central to education even more, right? We want to illuminate this interconnection and these impactful moments and bring all of our ways of knowing together to promote transformation. Um, and Dewey is, the source of this idea of aesthetic experiences, and he made it very clear that it does not have to revolve around art. But another author thinking about Dewey's work said that the reason it happens associated with art, visual art, music theater, etc., is because there's a softening of the boundary between the world and the self that takes place in the artistic experience. There's like an openness that has to occur when you are taking those in or creating those. But if we trace the origins of the term aesthetics, there's a Greek term that I will not butcher and try to pronounce that relates to this ability to perceive. And in one conjugated state, it means to reflect a dynamic state between subject and other that are each affecting, but not simply affecting the other. So that relational aspect of knowing, this like iterative process, um, comes from the origins of this word aesthetics. And so I included this image of coffee because this really happening is how I was taught about aesthetics, based on my professor's own experience learning about aesthetics in the same way. And so as he was talking about aesthetics, we have this warm cup of coffee, and he pours in milk, and he was making the point of how anything can be an aesthetic experience when we have cultivated a proclivity for noticing deeply. And so adding milk to coffee can be incredibly engaging as like the values shift, the clean demarcations of coffee and milk are eventually lost, and the depth of the mug or cup is challenged as the milk emerges back to the surface after being poured in. And so seeing this image, looking for these images to include, reminded me not only of that, but the smell of coffee in the room, this light heat emanating from his mug on the table in the classroom. And so this moment was transformative for me as a student. It awakened an interest in aesthetics and how differently we can experience the world through an aesthetics lens. But for others, it might have just been a useful visual that day to remember that we had discussed some things about aesthetics. And so we plan for transformation, but it doesn't mean it'll trigger it. But as educators, we still have to try. So now I get into another example of myself more as learner. And so this is an example of artwork from another research project. So in the project, I work in collaboration with a fellow art education professor. We've known each other for probably 15 years from when we were in graduate school till now. And so we've navigated the experience of being early career faculty together, usually over the phone or Zoom. We've never lived in the same place. And so we created these dual portraits about our experiences in our first jobs and our friendship as we experienced these first jobs. Um, and so we had written that, but we decided to take it a step further by extending our engrossment in each other to make works of art, not just written portraits of our experiences. And then we came together to share the works with each other that we had made. And we selected the most impactful ones. We had a few different options, but we ended up selecting these. The first versions are on the top. And so then we traded artwork almost, and the other person was able to work in the experience of witnessing um, that person's last few years or specific moment to give this other perspective for another iteration of the work. And I think it's really interesting that it was our continued engrossment in each other, but we needed to move beyond just the writing. We needed to have an experience where our bodies were in the same space together. We needed to bring in the arts in order to reach all of these aspects of what we had learned and what we knew about each other and sharing that are very difficult to put into words. And so this was a wonderful experience, solidified our years of collaboration. We will continue to be each other's favorite collaborator. At this point, we can almost like predict what the other one would write if we have to make edits to a paper and things like that. So, um, education has been focused on the mind, right? So, like when we're writing our paper, and so that can be disconnected from knowledge and rational thinking, but when we bring the body back into it, like in experiential learning, it gives such a deeper way of knowing. And so we needed to do more than write. We needed to bring our bodies into this. And we think about how this is important for making embodied learning an integral experience for students. Um, and so we have to have this phenomenological view with the body at the center of every perception and orientation to the world. And remember that an embodied knowledge is really a primary knowledge. And so I wanted to share this to be like, I'm still learning and I still learn very well in these ways. And every time I do something like this, it reminds me that I need to find these opportunities for students. So, looking at specific student experiences that I facilitated as an educator, one goal related to transformative education that I thought about was broader skills and dispositions for engaging in society. And so, my colleague at the University of Northern Iowa and I really push to bring our senior students to our state art education conference. They are about to enter this profession and they should go to the professional conference. But not only do we bring them to attend, we push them to collaboratively present at the conference and share things they've taught and other information and show them that they have things to share with very experienced teachers. And so my colleague and I sometimes will think that maybe it wasn't the greatest conference, right? Maybe we were in a very rural place with some limited attendance numbers or I don't know, something. And we always forget that the students are still greatly impacted by this experience. And we have seen some of them transform from just, kind of interested in the fact that they're about to be an art teacher to volunteering for leadership positions in this organization. And so we're not exactly sure how it will happen, but it's happened enough times that we prioritize this because we know it will be a transformative learning experience for at least one student. And so often when you're preparing teachers, you're bringing these hypothetical situations forward and they have to practice what will happen, and that can be really challenging for them to be motivated and take it seriously. And so whenever possible, having a real experience connected to the content is very, very important. And so not waiting for the ideal experience and making the most of what you happen is important for students to have that opportunity for transformation. Another goal that I noticed was new cultural competencies, and it immediately seeing that phrase made me think of a specific field trip I took. I taught for a music business college in Chicago for a little while. I taught their art appreciation class, and my students were all from the west and south parts of the city. And so we went to the Art Institute of Chicago together for a field trip. And I had grown up 40 minutes away from the museum, but I had never went till I was 22. My parents didn't really see art and museums as something that fit into our family culture. They're very working class and etc. So I had felt out of place and didn't belong, and it was really uncomfortable. And so taking students who live even closer but feel that the museum is not for them was really important to me. And so I guide them to enter the building, bring us into the rooms, but the aesthetic experience took over after that, right? And I got to see them gain this new cultural competency. They had this cultural capital, and I was able to take these pictures of them like really enthralled with certain pieces. And as we were getting ready to leave, one of the students commented, like, I can bring my wife here this weekend. I can bring a family member. They felt comfortable. They had gained this. This was a place that they could share with other people. And so being able to see that transformation from I'm an outsider and I don't belong here and I don't know how to access these things to I do belong here and I can share this with other people was really great. And um, I think seeing this new cultural competencies sometimes can trigger a very global awareness. But knowing my own students in Chicago, where people are they stay in their neighborhoods a lot, and in rural areas where we don't have access to other places, sometimes a geographically close culture um, needs to be explored. You need to gain competencies there. And maybe that's important before expanding to more global perspectives. All right, so I want to be conscious of time. So I have two examples. This one is very accessible, I feel. Thinking about holistic student growth, I love sketchbooks for metacognition and engrossment with the arts. Um, and so when my students are deeply engrossed and document all of this, I am able to be engrossed in them and get to know what they need. And so here I just have a random IB process portfolio page, but my former student on the other side, because I was able to understand his true goals, motivations, roadblocks, etc., I was able to tweak my plans to provide the most important learning experiences for him that were not necessarily exactly how I had planned. And his artwork is amazing. He's very self-motivated. He'll be applying to graduate school soon. But I'm not sure he would have passed my class if I had forced him to do exactly what I had planned. If I had not allowed um, experiences getting to know each other and engrossment to let me push my teaching decisions. A more I don't know. I feel like a big goal that's not always attainable was I took a group of students to Turkey to present their independent arts-based research. And so they got to enact professional skills, they gained new cultural competencies, and that transformative power of experience varied greatly. It manifested differently, but it definitely was an impactful learning experience for all of them. And I selected these students because of the variety of their travel experience. I was kind of testing it for future study abroad too. So one of my students was actually raised in um, Tanzania, had traveled all over the world alone. She's student teaching in Mozambique right now. Another student had traveled a lot, but with her parents. And then another had never been on a plane, barely left the state that we live in. And so seeing how this has affected their future plans, et cetera, is really rewarding. And so thinking about what kind of growth would my students really benefit from and how can I make that happen, from a local field trip to a professional conference that helps with their resume and their future goals, um, or sketchbooks. So my conclusions, as I'm right up against time, um, is to think about these things as a learner or teacher. That aesthetics is ultimately inquiry into all nuances. Yes, art classrooms are an ideal place for this kind of deep contemplation and imagination, but it's possible in every classroom, in every moment, if we are inspired by aesthetics. Engrossment extends the depth of inquiry. I think that supports transformation. And embodied experiences allows all ways of knowing to support transformation, doesn't limit it just to the mind and the cognitive. And so thinking about how can you prioritize aesthetics, this engrossed inquiry and experience, welcoming the body and mind into all educational and learning experiences for transformative education. And there's my thank you and my email address if you have any questions and follow-ups that you would like to ask. Ooh. All right. I am really fascinated. So I've asked my students a few times this, they use the word aesthetics in a very strange way, I feel. And so recently I had to bust out like, I don't think you're using that right. I think you're meaning it for like a certain color scheme. But I do think they understand, I guess, aesthetic objects and concept um, more deeply. I'm not sure they've attached to experience, right? And I I think if they have self-awareness of what they're doing, the implications of it, etc., that it does become a transformative learning experience. Unfortunately, I think they enter it through just I don't know, following what they see and not that metacognitive aware engagement in their actions. Okay. Anything else? Like, do I hear it?
Okay. Hi again, Dr. Samantha.
Yes.
So, thank you very much for the session. I think it was really interesting how you personalized it to your experiences. I think I like how you brought together the experience with your friend, and I think it felt really personal for me. So, I'd really like to thank you for putting it that way. So, it was a really interesting session from my perspective, and I believe that we've shared new experiences, new perspectives on aesthetics, and and experiences. So from I don't know, from let's say using the global south as a as a unique perspective, how can integrating aesthetics and embodied experiences into transformative education deepen learners' engagement and foster a more holistic approach to critical thinking and social change across diverse cultural contexts? I know you've covered a little bit about cultural context, but I don't know if there's any way you can throw a light on it on a more specific approach towards the global south, which I'm not part of, kind of. So I don't know. Do you
Can you repeat
understand?
that last part?
Okay, so how can integrating aesthetics and embodied experiences into transformative education deepen learners' engagement and foster a more holistic approach to critical thinking and social change across diverse cultural contexts?
I
So,
mean, if I had I mean, I live in rural Iowa, and my students have not, experienced much, and if I could do anything, I would probably, I don't know, be able to take them places, and, like, challenge a lot
so
of their, like, we just need exposure, to other people, and I don't even think we capitalize on, um, like, our local situations, right? Like, there are differences all around us that can be really impactful that prime us for, um, engaging in a more global and diverse world in a very, um, equitable, powerful, transformative way. Um, but I don't the US education context is very limited by our policies, right? Like, we don't have the time, um, we aren't permitted the time to let students just experience and explore. It has to have a very specific goal, very specific outcome, and so it's not easy to assess the goals of transformative education, and if you can't assess it, it's not valued. Even though it's more important, it makes good citizens of the world that we want.
So I think I'll take the part of promoting exploration, and then I'll see. So thank you very much for your response and for your time. I think we've spilled over, and thank you.